Thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar brought to you by New York State's Department of Public Service. We've got two amazing speakers today and an opportunity for your Q&A as well. To give some context, the Department of Public Service staff team is conducting a Make Ready program review. So as part of this review, we're having two speakers deeply familiar with the state of both the DC fast charge and level 2 industry and market share their perspective. We're really looking forward to understanding from them the state of the market, both what we've accomplished and where things may go, predominantly on a national level. Forward here. This is part of case 18E0138, which you can find on the New York Department of Public Service website. It's pretty easy to Google, and these are actually links, so they'll work when you download this presentation. This is focused on the Make Ready program, but there are many other related electric vehicle cases that are happening now. Again, these are active links that you'll be able to see. They include rates for electric vehicles, medium and heavy duty issues, and then proactive grid planning, amongst others. This is not a one-way form of communication. You can submit comments via those cases. And it sounds intimidating when you say submit comments, but it's actually a straightforward process. And if you Google it, you'll see some instructional videos, just showing you the right buttons to click, and you can get an inline text box, or you can, of course, sort of submit on your own letterhead. But the bottom line is it's a pretty straightforward process. You can also provide comments, or you can also provide questions during this webinar. And then we have another webinar on Thursday that delves into tech standards that we're very excited about and really think you should attend as a nice complement to this one. And there will be a more extensive period for people to provide comments there. We are currently accepting comments on a metering white paper and a petition to extend the current Make Ready program. So those are items that are currently in what we call a SAPA period. And please do pose any questions you have please do pose questions you have in the chat. We may not get to them, but we will try to get through as many as possible. So with that, I would like to go over today's agenda. We have a two-part webinar today. First is the state of the DCFC market with Lauren McDonald, who's the chief analyst at Perrin. And then will be Dr. Rachel Mueller, who has had an illustrious career, including at the Federal Joint Office of DOE and DOT, and has now recently joined Atlas Public Policy as a director there. And then we'll have time for your questions and answers. I am very excited to have Lauren McDonald on this panel today. Lauren is somebody who I didn't know before this, but did know through his incredible analysis. Lauren will break news by diving deep into NEVI filings and identifying trends in data that is otherwise opaque to me. So he breaks news that way, and then he also provides great insight on news articles, adding context. You can find him quoted in the popular press, but really, I highly recommend you follow him on LinkedIn, where he brings this valuable insights to all of us. So really excited for Lauren McDonald to join us today. Lauren, can I pass it to you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Oh, looks like Zach did it for me.
All right, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Ari, and really excited and honored to be on today's webinar. And with that, since I only have 20 minutes, I am going to dive right in. So basically, my presentation today is going to be in three buckets. The first in the majority of my presentation will be around fast charging industry trends. I actually started my first draft of the presentation with 17 trends and then took it down to 10. And then after rehearsing, I had to take it down to 6. So I'm leaving on the table a lot of things that I had hoped to talk about, but hopefully any of those that are really on your mind, we can talk about during the Q&A. The second section, I've got a couple of slides that just look at sort of what I see as sort of the goal and priorities in the different segments in the CPO charging network industry, and then consumer preferences, and then close out with one slide that just sort of takes all of this, boils it together into sort of what I think are sort of three major types of success factors. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. So my first trend is really about counteracting a lot of the negativity that we've been hearing in the industry for a while, right? The headlines, what's going on in Washington, D.C., the NEVI pause, et cetera. And, you know, there's been, you know, again, a fair amount of misinformation about what's actually going on in the fast charging industry. We are deploying, when I say we, the US fast charging industry is deploying at an unprecedented pace, right? This year, by my estimate of from a few months ago, will be well north of 16,000 newly deployed fast charging ports this year. You know, we're actually a little bit behind that right now, but summer months and stuff, and usually the end of the year, a lot of the companies pick up their pace to hit those goals before it starts, the ground starts freezing on the East Coast. But if you step back and look at, you know, kind of this in context, right, we're going to deploy roughly 50% more fast charging ports this year than we did just 2 years ago in 2023. And when you sort of add it all up, we're actually going to be at about 2.5 times the total number of open public DC fast charging ports this year then versus 2022. So, you know, what we're seeing here is kind of like almost a compound interest thing, right? So each year we're deploying more and more, and when you add it on top, you know, the top line number is really starting to take off. All right, sorry, just there we go. But then when you break this down, there's a couple of interesting things that have happened and are happening right now. The first is that for the first time, I say ever, but it's really in about the last 10 years. There was one year, I think it was 2012 or something, or 13, where Tesla was not number one after they launched the supercharger network. But in the modern history, last year was the first time that when you add up all the non-Tesla CPOs and charging networks, they actually deployed more fast charging ports than Tesla. So that was kind of, you know, kind of a breakthrough, big shift, if you will. And then this year it's growing even more substantially. So the non-Tesla CPOs will probably account for about 64% of new ports deployed in 2025. But if you look at Tesla, they're still the behemoth, right? Averaging plus or minus about 6,000 ports each year. Which leads us to the second trend, which is really one of my favorite things to sort of talk about what's going on in the industry is really a fundamental reshaping of the fast charging CPO / charging network market. You know, in the last 18 months or so, we've seen a number of new companies enter this space. I like to refer to most of them as charging 2.0 companies. These are companies that are large, well capitalized, and primarily entering the industry for different reasons than most of the existing players, right? And so we now have automakers that are basically racing up the leaderboard and are starting to sort of dominate the overall sort of number of ports being deployed, right? So, of course, we had Tesla and Rivian for a couple of years, Electrify America. But now we have Iona, Ford Charge, Mercedes, right? And you can even think about EVgo as sort of partially back to GM. They have a very good relationship with GM Energy, so that you could probably say they're about 0.5, if you will. But anyway, the color mechanism here is the light blue are the automakers, the light yellow are the hardware-centric companies, the gray being kind of the software-centric companies, the green sort of traditional CPOs, and then that sort of burnt oranges, whatever color you want to call that, is sort of what I refer to as the fuel and convenience. So the convenience store chains, the travel centers, et cetera. And so you're really seeing, a number of these new sort of large companies enter the space. I'm going to talk about kind of how their goals and priorities are a bit different than across the spectrum a bit later. But so, really, and who's not on this list is Walmart, because they're really just getting started. But if you roll forward several years, right, these automaker-backed companies, the fuel and convenience store chains, Walmart, et cetera, are fundamentally going to sort of dominate, sort of the top of these charts. The second thing, though, that's counter to that and somewhat fascinating is we are seeing dozens of new small CPOs launching like literally almost every day. So while there's going to be some consolidation and kind of a lot of the high volume of ports deployed with these sort of large, well-capitalized companies, we're also going to see a lot of smaller regional and specialized CPOs. This one here is a startup that's looking for funding and is planning to launch Rangeway, excuse me, on the West Coast, with sort of out near the coast in these little lounges and stuff like that. So we're going to see a lot of sort of specialization at the small end. And ultimately what this means is, as what happens in most industries, the guys in the middle kind of sometimes will struggle a bit because they're being pressured from both the top and the bottom. Which leads to the third trend, which is that a lot of these new players, again, what I like to affectionately refer to as charging 2.0 players, these companies are sort of entering the space kind of for different reasons, are really fundamentally building and changing the customer experience. We've all experienced situations like the one on the left where you pull into the parking lot of a shopping mall at 10, 11 o'clock at night. It's closed and you're in the back corner and there's one or two low power chargers. And this one is well lit in my AI image, but oftentimes there's no lighting. It feels unsafe, et cetera, right? And really, sort of the new game is all about building this sort of stellar customer experience. So almost kind of replicating what ultimately happened in the gas station industry, which morphed into the convenience store and travel center industry, right? Where you have awnings, lounges, or access to the convenience store. You've got pull-through lanes, bathrooms, Wi-Fi, food, oftentimes co-located with restaurants. And late at night, there's probably a password that you can use to get into it. So just fundamentally, a lot of these new companies are building. They're not just sticking chargers in the ground. They're fundamentally building sort of a customer experience to help EV drivers when they're sitting there for 20 to 45 minutes fueling up their vehicle. And this fourth sort of trend and sort of related piece to that is what I sort of call 10 is the new 4. I did a LinkedIn post a couple of months ago about this. Electrify America announced that almost all, not 100%, but almost all of their new stations were going to be 10 or more chargers slash ports and stuff. And that is fundamentally a major shift and change among sort of these major players. I mean, Tesla's obviously been doing that for a long time. They're now at averaging 15 ports per new station, but Iona, Mercedes, BP Pulse, Walmart, several other companies are averaging about 9 to 10 ports per new station. And even like Rivian, as everyone knows, averages 6 and stuff. But when you sort of add that all up, there still are a lot of new charging stations that have only sort of one or two ports, and a lot of those are at dealerships and stuff. So that takes the non-Tesla CPO average down a bit. But the really exciting news about all of this is that it's creating a much better experience for consumers, because if you get to a charging station that has two ports or something, and one of them is broken and one of them is full, you might wait 30 minutes or whatever it is to open up. When there's 10 stalls, if you will, and one's broken and 6 are full or whatever, you can slot right in. Or if they're all full, there's going to be somebody finished probably within 5 minutes. So the larger stations are really creating a significantly better experience. And on top of that, we're really seeing sort of the trend towards significantly higher power stations, right? When you add up again across both Tesla and non-Tesla, in Q2 we saw 63% of all new ports were 250 kW or higher. Obviously, a lot of that number is impacted by Tesla, but still about close to 40% of the non-Tesla was at that. And a high percentage of those, again, are these sort of new charging 2.0 players that are deploying on standard 350 and 400 kW. So, like 10 is the new 4, 350, 400 is sort of the new 150 on the kW side. So again, all this adds up to what's trending towards is really a sort of a greater and better charging experience for consumers. The fifth one, though, is somewhat kind of, I think, is a concerning and a bit of a wake-up call to the non-Tesla CPOs out there. We're seeing really rather slow adoption of the NACS, although a lot of people hate using the term NACS, the J3400 ports and connectors. If you look at the chart on the right, the funny thing is you'll see that there were actually more CHAdeMO connectors deployed in Q2 than there were J3400 across the non-Tesla networks, right? And I say this is somewhat concerning and to me kind of a warning shot to the non-Tesla CPOs, because we're actually starting to see Tesla steal market share, right? We're seeing those people in those Chevy Equinoxes and the Ford Mustang Mach-E's and the Lightnings and all the different non-Tesla vehicles actually now starting to charge at Tesla supercharger stations, right? Depending on the region and market you might see 10% to 25% of the vehicles charging at a supercharger being non-Tesla, and we're only just getting started. But so why are the non-Tesla CPOs sort of lagging behind on this? Some of them are still waiting for new hardware that has the connectors. It's not cheap to retrofit existing charging stations. Some of them are waiting for more new BEVs to arrive with the J3400 port built in. I just did some analysis and forecast on Q3, and by my estimate, about 50,000 EVs will be sold in Q3 that come with the factory built-in J3400 port, and by the end of the next year, right, that could be close to 80%. So this is going to move really, really quickly. And but then you do have companies like Iona and some of the others that are deploying their new stations with roughly things like a 60-40 split, meaning 60% of the chargers will have a CCS connector, 40% a J3400. All right, my last trend is really about utilization, right? What we're seeing is in Q2 versus Q1, we actually saw a small decline in fast charging US utilization from about 16.5% down to about 16%, right? So we're seeing some interesting trends in that overall deployment might actually be outpacing, especially in the second and third tier markets, the session demand. But, two things that a lot of the nerds in the industry like to talk about, but don't get a lot of coverage in the media and more broadly is the sort of the key factors that drive those high utilization stations. And it's really been a couple of things. One, it's rideshare drivers. So I don't have current data because EVgo stopped breaking it out in their more recent shareholder presentations. But in Q1 2024, they said that 24%, think about that, 1/4 of their energy throughput came from one customer segment, rideshare drivers, off the charts. I don't know what it is today, but my guess is it could be close to 30% now. And then the other part of that was that those free charging programs that you get when you buy a new vehicle from a lot of the automakers was 13%. So you add that up, and 37% of their business was from either rideshare drivers or sort of free charging. And again, Electrify America has even more partnerships. And again, I don't know what the number is, but it could be 25% or more of their utilization basically comes from rideshare drivers. The interesting thing is that though this is sort of on average, and when you look at some of the major markets like New York, San Francisco, LA, Miami, Las Vegas, Austin, et cetera, those sort of tech-centric, high adopting markets where rideshare is, one of the predominant ways that people get around, either as a destination visitor or local people. The rideshare throughput is likely 40 to 50%, right? Just a massive percentage of the business. And we're seeing that the best performing stations in these high adopting markets are seeing utilization rates of 60 to 80% or more. It's crazy. But the second and third tier markets might only be seeing 5%, right? So we really have a sort of a charging divide in the country. Last 2 points on this is that this being said, there are a lot of companies like Revel and BP Pulse that are now building stations specifically targeting the rideshare drivers, often near airports. The last thing, though, is it's really going to be interesting. We're not seeing an impact yet, but it's going to be interesting to see how the growth of autonomous vehicles like Waymo, Zoox, et cetera, impact this, because their charging is primarily going to be done at depots. So if they take over a lot of the rideshare market share, this could negatively impact a lot of the major CPOs who are counting on a lot of that rideshare business. All right, let's move over into CPO goals and priorities. As I mentioned on that earlier slide, we have all these sort of new players entering the market. And again, I don't have time to go through this chart in detail. You'll all get the slides afterwards, but I just wanted to sort of point out a couple of things that when you segment these different types of companies, the automakers, the traditional CPOs, the fuel and convenience store chains, those smaller CPOs, the hardware-centric networks and the software-centric networks, they all kind of have different reasons of being in the industry, right? The automakers are primarily in the industry to sell more EVs, right? It took many of them sort of reluctantly to get there, but then they realized that they had to enter the industry to help create a better charging experience, right? The hardware and software companies are looking to sell more hardware and software and network fees and stuff. The CPOs are really looking to sell energy primarily, but the fuel and convenience store chains, those, Circle K, 7-Eleven, Sheetz, Wawa, Love's, Pilot, et cetera, they're in the industry to start replacing the fuel revenue that they're seeing starting to see decline and drive people inside the store. They all got really excited in the last couple of years when they realized that people pull in, park in front of their store for 20 to 45 minutes. And if we can get them to go inside and spend $15 on a latte, a sandwich, and a lotto ticket, right? That's where their margins are. So it's really important when we think about policy and who you give grants to and those types of things to understand the motivation and priorities of these different types of companies. All right. The last thing on this before I wrap up is what are sort of driver preferences? Really the number one thing is drivers, whether it's on the highway, they want convenient locations that are right next to the highway, just like they're used to the gas stations. And if they live in an apartment or something and they have to count on fast chargers kind of for their daily, weekly charging, they want it to be sort of on their same routes, right? So they want it to be near those gas stations that they used to go to or whatever it is. So convenient locations is really the number one thing. And these preferences are obviously different for different individuals, but fundamentally after convenience, people want, food and amenities. They want a clean bathroom. They want coffee. Coffee is typically the number one, amenity that people want after a restroom, but, they want access to food, nice restaurants or quick service restaurants, or being able to go inside the convenience store and buy a sandwich, a salad, etc. And high reliability, right? The industry really suffered from a black eye for a couple of years with a lot of the news saying that, 1/4 of the fast chargers were broken or unavailable, right? So, high priority now consumers like they're going to go to stations and brands that they trust, that they know will have high reliability and ease of use, right? The importance of things like plug and charge, right? And being able to just get that, what everybody likes to call the Tesla charging experience, plug in, walk away. People don't want to have to download, multiple apps and have RFID cards and stuff. They want to be able to just, plug in, tap their credit card, whatever it is. So ease of use of the charging experience, and that includes, things like having a NACS adapters and stuff are key. Fast, they don't want to wait, right? They don't want to queue. Obviously, that's going to happen on things like holidays like Thanksgiving and stuff, but fundamentally, they understand that they might have to wait during busy times in the afternoon and stuff, but that's why those larger stations and high power stations are becoming really important, giving drivers confidence that they can pull up, plug in, or maybe only have to wait 5 minutes. And then price, right? Some people are obviously very price sensitive, but today most people care much more about all the other 5 things that I've talked about, right? Those are sort of much more important to them. In the future, when there's much more competition and there's 4 charging stations all located in the same Buc-ee's parking lot, right? Price is going to be much more important to some people. All right. Wrapping up and bringing that all together, what does it mean? What are my 3 buckets of success factors? It's really creating a stellar customer experience and focusing on that driver experience. So again, it's locating in convenient locations, not 5 miles off the highway. It's that higher port install count, right? Whether it's eight or more, whatever the number is, but having, significant optionalities, I like to call it. Restrooms, food, lounges, safe and well lit. I didn't really talk about that, but safety is really important, and lighting and stuff for a lot of people, and signage to make it easy for people to find these places, and integrating with automakers in their navigation that actually direct you to the stations. Second key summary is really sort of technology and future proofing. Again, those high power chargers and being upgradable, right? So that you use hardware that you can actually plug in new models and upgrade as technology improves. And, proven and reliable technology and hardware, right? That NACS J3400 CCS split, so giving, basically paralleling what's going on in the industry and making sure that you have enough NACS plugs, et cetera, as that market grows. The plug and charge. And one of the trends I didn't really get to cover is is dealing with demand charges and the grid challenges and things like that. So I think battery integrated chargers is going to be key in the future. And the last thing is dependable operators, right? There's been some, companies that not necessarily the best practice performers and stuff like that. So it's really important to work with companies that are aligned with your goals and things. And so solid business models, well capitalized, have proven reliability and support, strong SLAs and response times, and performance monitoring, right? You shouldn't have to call up the CPO to tell them that a charger is down, right? They should be monitoring this ahead of you. So I know that was a lot, but Ari, and here's just some contact information, but I will pass it back to you.
That was a lot, but you also got through a lot. My only complaint is there was a lot of talk about food and coffee, and it's lunchtime, and I'm a little behind. But other than that, it was really fabulous, and I see that there's some questions coming in the Q&A, and I hope there are more. I certainly have a few. For folks who joined the webinar a little bit late, just a little context, you're joining Lauren McDonald and Dr. Rachel Nealer, who are giving us a state of the DCFC and level 2 industry. This webinar is a first course. The second course is on Thursday, where we'll be delving deep into technical standards. As you could tell from Lauren's presentation, both speakers are independent experts. They don't necessarily represent DPS's point of view, but they have deep knowledge that's, I think, useful for all of us, all stakeholders. Following Lauren is a tough act to follow, but thankfully our next speaker is up to the challenge. Dr. Rachel Nealer has been a leader of transportation and energy. It was actually in one of her last jobs title, where she was the acting director of the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, which sort of spearheaded and helped synchronize so much of the EV infrastructure that the country has. She joined Atlas Public Policy very recently. She also serves on the board of the Center for Sustainable Energy and is a fellow at the Carnegie Mellon Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. So we're really privileged to be joined by such a systems thinker who can bring some insight into the L2 market, which I think has historically, been a little bit lower profile, a little more under the radar as compared to DCFC. So please join me in welcoming Rachel and joining us on this webinar.
Thank you so much, Ari. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to share my slides here. All right, all up and running?
Looks great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is a really important topic, and I'm thrilled to share this update on level 2. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the level 2 EV charging market has been growing steadily for years and has been picking up pace. This graphic shows that since 2021, more than 85,000 level 2 public charging ports have been added to the EV charging network. And while DC fast chargers are considered the backbone of the charging network, as described by Lauren, making long distance travel more accessible, it's really the level 2 that is the lifeblood of the system. While light duty use cases vary widely, typical daily use data shows that 70% of daily driving is under 40 miles and 95% is under 100 miles, with vehicles typically parked for 95% of their lifetime. And that's really where level 2 comes in. A 2023 National Renewable Energy Lab study modeled the number of chargers, both DC fast chargers and level 2, to support 50% EV sales by 2030, and found that nationally about 1 million level 2 chargers are needed. Since 2023, the landscape of EV support has changed, but the fact remains that level 2 charging is needed in significant numbers to support EV drivers. And really the good news is that we have hundreds of thousands of data points now to understand how to do level 2 deployment strategically. So what does a level 2 charging station look like? It really is a complement to DC fast charging in that it has better interoperability and accessibility inherently. All EVs on the road today can easily plug into the J1772. There's a lot of acronyms here. Charging connector that is used at level 2 sites. Tesla is the only vehicle that requires an adapter, and those are widely available. And because level 2 chargers operate at much lower power levels, they are comparatively safer than other adapters for DC fast charging, with the most significant safety risk of misuse. In addition, level 2 chargers have much lighter cords and connectors, which means they are much easier to use by people with mobility limitations. Level 2 chargers are inherently more reliable than DC fast chargers because they use a basic alternating current or AC conversion. They have fewer components and have less sophisticated cooling and power electronic systems, which all mean fewer parts of failure. Level 2 chargers are cheaper to install and operate, but that also means that the revenue stream can be small. Many level 2 chargers to date are at low or no cost to drivers and really seen as an amenity, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next couple slides. Lastly, the biggest trade-off between DC fast chargers and level 2 charging is why exactly we have these two networks. It's the speed of charging. DC fast chargers are able to provide much faster charging. Commercial level 2 charging is available to provide power up to 19.2 kilowatts, but the range is from 3 to 19.2 kilowatts. Whereas DC fast chargers, as you heard from Lauren right now, can charge 50 to 350 kilowatts, with even higher power systems being developed and deployed, which really makes sense for that long distance travel that we just heard about. Moving on to the business model side of level 2 charging, there are a number of different models in the real world today, starting with host owned and operated. This is what you would typically see with an amenity model. A business or organization wants to offer level 2 charging at their facilities. An example would be hotels that offer EV charging. The chargers are owned and operated by that site host, the hotel. There are also network operated systems like the public charging you see peppered about communities, where EV charging companies like ChargePoint, Blink, EVgo install, operate, and maintain the chargers. In this case, the site host may receive some compensation for using that property. Then this is where things get a little bit trickier. Utilities or government can own and operate an EV charger, but they can also provide funding in a way that enables host or network operated chargers. Utility make-ready programs, especially ones that don't provide funds for the charger itself, but rather all the electrical upgrades, make it easy for the host operated and the network operated models. Finally, a couple more business models that don't exist quite in a single bucket, but are important ones to talk about. There are the membership models, which are often coupled with network operated, where you're able to use the network through a membership. Lauren mentioned these. That's the drivers that use apps or RFID cards to authenticate and pay for charging. Fleet and private access to similar, but is similar to that membership model, but focuses more on access to the physical location. Sometimes this is called the behind the fence charging, where you can only charge if you have access to that location. This really includes delivery companies, corporate fleets, government vehicles, and sometimes rideshare services. Workplace charging is a model where employees of a company can charge while at work. Often this is provided as an employee benefit or at a significantly reduced price, and can also be behind the fence. An example is where I used to charge at the Department of Energy that has EV chargers in their garage at headquarters, but you need a DOE badge in order to access that garage. Multi-unit dwelling charging is when chargers are installed at apartment buildings or condos or other multi-unit residential buildings to provide charging to residents. Often it's managed through property management or other third-party providers. And then finally, curbside charging is when chargers are installed along streets, often in cities similar to parking meters. My family and I just used this recently on our trip to Montreal, and given that experience, it's one of my personal favorites of types of charging. And this type of charging is often utility or government owned and operated as a service to the public that can be free or require payment. Ideally, you want level 2 chargers where there are reasonably long dwell times, so kind of the opposite of DC fast charging. And you want them to be market leading, but not too far ahead of the market. You want the demand to support the chargers, but you also want the chargers to be an on-ramp to greater demand. This includes location siting that is convenient and paired with the dwell time appropriately, what's called kind of right speeding. You want to install the right number of chargers to minimize wait times. This can also be mitigated through future-proofing the installation, making the stations readily available for upgrades so it can grow with demand. You want to make sure the stations are maintained properly so that uptime and reliability are not compromised and that any damage is repaired quickly. Most of these are considered best practices for all EV charging, but look slightly different in practice for level 2 versus DC fast charging. So then what does a good or successful level 2 network look like? It needs to be reliable. It needs to offer the right speed of charging. The stations need to be available everywhere, and the stations need to look and feel largely the same. This is very similar to what Lauren was talking about too, but again, a little bit of a different flavor with level 2. Level 2 already has a good track record of offering reliable charging. For example, New York City's level 2 curbside charging pilot of 100 chargers achieved 99.9% uptime during their 18-month evaluation period. While level 2 is more reliable than DC fast charging, it's not a given and needs to continue to improve through hardware and software solutions. All chargers, not just level 2, need to be at the right size for customers, right speed for customers. This is easier said than done. You heard Lauren talking a lot about some of the trade-offs there. In broad terms, though, you don't need DC fast charging in places with long dwell times, like overnight charging, and you don't want level 2 chargers at rest stops where drivers are expecting to charge quickly. There are a lot of lessons learned and best practices available on right speeding, including the rural and urban toolkits published by DOT in February of 2022 and July of 2023, respectively. As estimated by the NREL report, 1 million level 2 chargers are needed to support 50% EV sales, which means they are the lifeblood of the public EV charging market and need to be ubiquitous. The more available level 2 charging is, it becomes more like Wi-Fi, where you don't know exactly where you'll plug in, but you know it'll be there. That's incredibly important for the driver experience. And finally, the stations need to be generally uniform. Drivers need to be able to understand easily how to charge, and it needs to be intuitive. We're currently at about 10% EV sales in the US, and there are many drivers out there with the benefits of home charging that are willing to have a less than perfect experience at public charging stations occasionally. But the mass market isn't going to put up with that type of disruption. So stations need to be uniform and reliable. Which brings me to standards. And as Ari mentioned, you'll hear much more about that in the next webinar. Standards are critically important to developing a successful EV charging network. We know the various connectors and payment types and memberships and apps that when the market was developing were developed in individual company silos. Now is the opportunity to bring this all together and provide a convenient customer experience. Chargers need to be easy and reliable to use. In most cases, level 2 chargers are plug and charge today. My hot take is that they need to continue to offer that kind of service, even if it requires hardware and software costs. Because in the end state, EV charging should be easier than paying for parking. It shouldn't require multiple apps. It shouldn't end in payment failure or retrying the station multiple times. It should be a seamless experience, and plug and charge standards like ISO 15118 enables that experience, and it will be what the driver expects going forward. That's why, in part, we've seen so much success with the Tesla model. It's convenient. Now pulling this all together, here's my sorry, here's my final slide. With a figure from that 2023 NREL needs assessment for EV charging. The whole system needs to work in harmony with public level 2 destination charging, a small number but critical trunk or backbone of DC fast chargers along corridors and in communities, and then a healthy route system of private charging at home and at work. This ecosystem needs to be reliable, at the right speeds by location, ubiquitous and uniform for a positive driver experience. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to many questions after this. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much for your presentation and for throwing in a spicy take to get the Q&A. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to start with a question, something that was on Lauren's slide. So actually, yeah, step back. Reminder, please throw questions in. It's not often that we have folks like this available to answer them. So really hope people can take advantage. Lauren, there's a question from the audience on clearly your slide showing the number of Chatamo plugs still being installed caught people's attention.
Okay.
Which is, but I mean, I just bought a Laserdisc player recently, so I'm not one to judge, but I will say that that's a little bit surprising.
Yeah.
So would be interested to see if you think that's potentially driven by incentive program requirements, or what is like causing folks to hang on to a plug that I don't think any new vehicles support anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a couple of things. One, right, it might be, there's some local incentives that were sort of behind that. It's also, it depends on the market. For example, in Hawaii, when they announced the NEVI Awards a couple of years ago, they said they were going with a significant percentage of Chatamo because apparently there was a large percentage of Nissan Leafs in Hawaii on the market, right? So they actually looked at the data and stuff. So part of it can be that in some particular markets, right, there still is a high volume of Nissan Leafs. There's also the Mitsubishi Outlander, which a lot of people don't know uses the Chatamo adapter and can charge actually at fast chargers. But it's fundamentally the Leaf. And the third thing is that years ago, I don't know if they do it anymore, but EVgo used to use a CCS on one cable and a Chatamo on the other, and then you could actually use the NACS adapter on that, so you could retrofit it and things like that. So there could be something around that where they're using that Chatamo connector also as basically a Tesla NACS connector that you just add the adapter on. But yeah, no, it's sort of fascinating, and I think that number's gonna go down probably pretty quickly now. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. All right, thank you for that context. And who knew? That's an interesting tidbit about Hawaii as well.
Yeah.
Rachel, I am curious. I have a question for you. Lauren described a lot of innovation that was happening in the DCFC market, right? New product designs being tried, et cetera. You described a positive experience of curbside charging on your road trip. I'm curious if you are also sort of seeing innovations around L2 that do make the sort of that either have improved reliability, because reliability has not always been a given even in L2, and or improve the sort of customer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the more that we can reduce points of failure, as I mentioned, as possible, that is really important for all EV charging. I think level 2, like I said, I mean, right now it already is plug and charge. In many cases, if you have a home unit, you just plug in and you're done, right? So I think the more we can ensure reliability, and I don't know that is necessarily aligned with all the bells and whistles, adding more bells and whistles to level 2 chargers, because they could be additional points of failure. So I think that's something that we're just going to have to manage going forward. I do think that especially to complement the DC fast charging market, which, you know, inherently does have a lot more bells and whistles and needs to in order to offer these higher charging speeds. I think if we can offset that with kind of dumb chargers everywhere, I think that would be a good outcome.
Okay, I see. So you're sort of saying, Lauren, after you.
Yeah, can I just add a couple of things? I think just on the, level two innovation side, a couple of things that we're seeing is, in addition to those like curbside chargers that Rachel talked about, there's companies that are doing light pole charging, right? They're retrofitting light poles. Now they don't necessarily have a lot of power to pull from those light poles, but it's an innovative approach. We're also seeing a lot of innovation in the multifamily space, right? Where companies are using basically like level one boxes that you can plug in and give tenants dedicated spaces, right? Tapping into their meter. Like there's a lot of interesting things going on there to make it easy for multifamily developers to deploy, chargers at a lower cost and give tenants kind of a similar experience that they'd get if they owned a home with a garage. And then in the hotel space, right? We're seeing a lot of the major hotel chains really start to invest in this. There was a study recently that I think it was Hilton, I might have it wrong, but said that the number one reason people are choosing their hotels now is based on whether they have chargers or not, right? And so I think we're going to see a lot of innovation there. You can already, a lot of companies have it so that you use your room key card to actually swipe it and authenticate the charger so that random people don't come and like charge and it automatically bills your room. So I think there's those, level two has a lot of cool things that may fly under the radar, but there's a lot of interesting innovations going on in that space.
You got me my wheels turning, Lauren.
Yeah.
Another good development or an innovative development in level two is bring your own cord.
Right.
So I actually think a lot of these solutions that you named, including bring your own cord, you can look to Europe for a lot of these innovations being deployed. I think it has always been a point of tension of what technical solutions we can bring to the US. Because many of the European cities and regions that are deploying it have very unique circumstances that don't necessarily translate to all places in the US. But I do think that there is a lot of interest to figure out which solutions can be paired with what type of demographic that you're trying to provide EV charging. So bring your own cord is also a really cool one, and these really interesting. I think it's bring your own post as well, where you can actually like just plug into the street ground using a post that connects to your car, and that allows just the flexibility. More flexibility in kind of curbside charging. So curbside charging with just a stationary charger would just provide charging for a couple spots, whereas this one is you could park wherever you wanted to and then put the post in or put the cord in and be able to charge where there's parking freely available.
That's very interesting. So I guess if I could synthesize some of the kinds of innovations you're both describing now too seem to be around reach, right? So trying to bring charging where there's not accessible charging before, let's say be it on light posts or in multi-unit dwellings. And then also on simplicity, right? So, not innovations around amenities, although I do think, there's no coffee dispensers on the L2 machines, but there are innovations so that the billing is easier than parking. And Rachel, I will say that's a very having tried to use street parking in new cities, I would say easier than parking is a low bar at this point. Those apps are just terrible. I'm gonna go. I'm going to the audience Q&A here. I see one question. Again, keying off of your slide, Lauren, showing the utilization. There was a hypothesis that the Q1 to Q2 dip was linked to weather, right? So EVs have higher energy requirements in the
Yeah,
cold.
absolutely.
Okay.
Oh,
Fastest
was
answer.
that the question
That was
or
the
just?
question.
Yeah, no, yeah. So I just, again, I didn't have time to sort of go into detail. I think I already went long, but yeah, I mean, part of the dip was exactly that. Cars take longer to charge in January and February than they do in May, in June, right? Just because of the the battery technologies and stuff. So that was definitely part of it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Zach, I
But
see
but
you. Oh yeah, sorry.
Just to add to that, but again, we were starting to see what we believe is building ahead of session demand, right? In that we are now building so many, fast charging ports and the EV sales, except for Q3, which is going to be, a record. But yeah, that in some markets, particularly the second and third tier markets, right, deployment is outpacing the growth of EVs and session demand.
Okay. Well, that ties into another question then, um, which is given this, right? So you're seeing this business model development of producing these large stations, high power stations
Yeah.
with amenities, which strikes me as very compelling to customers, but also potentially costly
Yes,
to
very
operate.
costly.
Do you see, I guess, do you see I don't know, a reconciliation of those two trends in the quarters ahead of reduced, of now potentially overcapacity of
Right.
DCFC and high cost DCFC versus potentially slowing sales?
Yeah, so that's why again it's really important to understand the sort of the goals, priorities, and makeup of the different companies and those different segments that I walked through. So, a lot of the many of the automaker backed charging networks like Ion and Mercedes-Benz, right? Some of the other ones in Walmart coming soon, et cetera, basically are saying they are going to build ahead of demand. They're future proofing, right? So they are saying that, they have goals. Some of them have goals to build, 20, 30,000 ports by the end of this decade in the US or North America. And so they are they are building ahead of demand and to ensure a stellar customer experience. And so what that means is the short term, they're spending a lot of money and will have potentially lower utilization, but they're okay with that, right? And so that differs from, a smaller regional CPO who has to go to a bank with a pro forma and their forecast and utilization that it's going to go up and to the right and hit a certain number and break even in 4 years or whatever it is, right? And to get that loan to build it, right? These are companies that have the capital. They've already committed et cetera. Now, that being said, some of them might change their pace in a couple of years, right? But right now they're all committed to it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but really it's sort of different for different companies. And the net of it though, Ari, is that one of the unfortunate things with sort of the NEVI pause and kind of the future is that I wrote this article a few months ago called Data is the New Incentives, right? And not that incentives aren't important, they're still going to be part of every level 2 and DC fast charger deployment in the US for a long time. But that a lot of these companies have really sort of pivoted and they're focused on deploying new charging stations only where they make economic sense, right? Only where they think the utilization is going to be high. And so the negative is that it we're going to see less deployment in the second and third tier markets and those rural markets, right? Just because they don't pencil out, right? And so it's sort of, the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer from a geographic perspective. And that's why, that rideshare slide I used was something I wanted to talk about because, again, there are stations in San Francisco, for example, that are getting 80, 90% utilization. And then you can go to, uh, somewhere in Montana or whatever, and they have 1% utilization, right? And, not surprisingly, right? And so we have this, these sort of chasm and stuff. And so the money is going to flow where the utilization is going to be high.
Okay. Um, Thank you. I think that actually leads into another question from the Q&A, which is about station economics. So I think Lauren and Rachel would love your feedback on what those inputs are, right? So Lauren, you just made the point that utilization is a key driver, right? You have to have sufficient demand. But there was a question in the chat about costs, right?
Right.
So for example, utility rates are an input, right? So are you seeing utility rates as a major driver of where stations do and don't go?
Do you want me to start with that or?
Yeah, sorry, that was, yes.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
Lauren, if you can start, that would be great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely, right. I actually was speaking with a CPO the other day who was talking to a East Coast utility, and when the utility heard what the size of the station that the CPO planned, the utility said, "We don't think we can deliver that amount of energy at that location," right? So that's sort of one of the challenges that I didn't have time to get to is that not just sort of the pricing and stuff, but is there enough grid capacity, right? And so that affects, where you can locate, right? That's why, the NEVI program sometimes was challenging because a lot of those stations are going to be out in the middle of nowhere where it's like a local small like municipal, utility that just doesn't have the power that they can bring to it. And that's why, we're going to start to see more and more, I believe, of the battery integrated storage and with the chargers, right? So they can pull from the grid, during off hours and stuff, and during peak time, pull the power from the batteries and that type of thing. And obviously, if you're a CPO, the number one issue in the industry really is demand charges, right? Demand charges can just ruin the economics of a charging station, right? And so, I know New York had some reform around that, right, with the demand charges and stuff, but offsetting and minimizing demand charges is probably on the cost side at the top or near the top of the list for most CPOs, right? How do we minimize those, you know, bills for $100,000 in a month or something like that, right?
Okay, that's great, Lauren. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put a fine point. I think sort of the grid constraints are two part.
Yeah.
One is the being able to get the power in the
Yeah.
first place. But then in terms of the economics,
Yeah.
demand charges, which let's for folks who are not as familiar, they charge you on the amount of power that the site is capable of pulling in, not on how much energy is used, and so it has a disproportionate economic impact on lower utilization stations. Um, and then, okay, so those are the two main issues at play. That makes sense. Um, I assume, Rachel, that the L2 story is a little bit different, both because the margins are lower,
Yeah.
the power requirements are lower, so perhaps demand charges are less consequential. But would love your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was gonna go, Ari, especially because the margins are much lower for level two. The least cost for electricity is the most ideal for level two. However, I don't know that because we want this to be ubiquitous, we want this to be everywhere, which is a big difference for DC fast chargers, right? We need DC fast chargers to be in strategic places to help with long distance or to top off for certain places in communities. But because it is going to be more costly, people are not going to use it as much as they would use something like level two charging. So I don't think you're going to have as much of like a shift in where the level two chargers are placed based on utility rates because there needs to be many of them. But when you start thinking about the macroeconomics of it, you do want the utility rates to be low in order for there to be a return on that investment.
Okay, got it. So, lower margins are still sensitive to electricity costs.
Yeah.
Um, Lauren, I had there. You had brought up these sort of very high. This is a question from in the
Yep.
chat. You brought up the fact that we are ramping up power levels on chargers and
Right.
ramping them up on vehicles, which in a way is a nice technological
Yep.
story, right? For a while it looked like the charger power levels were far out, at 150
Yep.
kW, were far outpacing what the vehicles could provide. But now it seems like they're moving more together.
Yep.
What are we going to do with our first and second generation hardware that's out there that's, much lower power levels? Is that going to sort of stay in place, or do you suspect there is either a need or a desire to I guess repower it?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and Rachel talked about the sort of the right sizing or your right speeding, sorry. And yeah, and that's something again is one of those trends that I didn't have time to get to, but while I talked all about, high power 350, 400 kW, et cetera, the reality is matching charging power with dwell time is really important, right? Like one of my favorite places to stop at was on Interstate 5 in California at a steak restaurant. I'm not a big steak eater, but when we would stop off there on the way back from LA, it was always a treat to have, some nice ground beef, right? Um, and if you're sitting there for an hour, hour and a half, right, you don't need a 350 kW charger, right? Like a 150 is probably fine, or 100 or something like that. If you're parked at a shopping mall and going for a 2-hour shopping excursion and lunch with your friend and stuff, or at a movie theater, right? So while we talk all about these sort of high power and the growth in what cars can charge, the reality is, 100, 150, even lower, like still makes sense based on the use case of the location. So to answer your question, if those lower power, high, fast chargers are located, um, in areas where people are going to be sitting for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, or whatever it is, then they probably will continue to be used at a high level and continue to make economic sense, especially if they're priced lower than a 400, 350 kW, charge and stuff. And the second thing is, yeah, what'll drive it is economics, right? So I won't name any charging networks, but if you're one of the major charging networks and you have, low power chargers, and they're not seeing customers much anymore, right? Then you're going to go, okay, we have a 12-year lease with the site host, right? It's in a good location. It's next to a restaurant, like whatever it is. Yeah, it's worth spending the money to upgrade it because we know we can make the utilization and the economic sense. So it's all going to come back to economics and the use case of whether they stay or replace. But in many cases, they're going to be replaced just because they're old,
Yeah,
right? Like
definitely.
fast charging hardware doesn't last forever, right? And it ranges widely, but it can range from 4 or 5 years to 10 years, whatever it is, right? So a lot of that older hardware is just going to be replaced because they're starting to die anyway.
Okay, great.
Could I add too, Ari, that reliability might be a driving factor as well,
Yeah.
right? Because as we get better and better at deploying and improving the technology of these charging stations, whether it's level 2 or DC fast charging, although DC fast, has a bigger reliability issue, that might actually be the driver to change out the equipment, which we've started seeing already.
Fascinating. Lauren, you don't, it's okay to not mention charge point operators' names, but you should definitely mention restaurants' names.
Okay. Harris Steak Ranch on Interstate 5. Love to stop there on the way home.
5-star review.
Thanks.
The you're bringing up something fascinating, actually. So I will get back to, there's another audience question I want to get to in a minute, and it speaks to both L2 and DCFC, which is difference in usage by site type. But I don't want to leave this topic yet because I think it's interesting. Do you think there's potential in sort of this repowering, the right type of site to be able to do more with less, to be able to get greater chart utilization, right, out of yeah, an existing grid infrastructure, an existing lease, presumably it would be cheaper to to take a 100 kW charger to 350, maybe not, but could be cheaper to bring one from 100 to 350 than it would be to start from a green field. So I'd be kind of curious if you think that that would be a valuable, that would be sort of have high utility for EV drivers.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but you're talking about migrating lower power chargers to higher power and sort of the economics of that,
Not
or
only, but also, the part of the function for DCFCs
right,
is that they're helping serve travel, people's travel patterns, right?
right,
And
right,
EV growth is slowing, but it's not reversing, right? I mean,
right, right.
it may not be reversing. So presumably then there's value in being able to get more out of existing stations. I'm just kind of
Yeah,
curious if
yeah.
that's
I
a
mean, I
useful.
think I touched on this a little bit, but I mean, I think one of the slides that I had to cut was getting at what you talked about earlier. It was just sort of, the charging curves, right? So we're now seeing a lot of the new EVs that can charge from 10 or 20% to 80% in 15 to 20 minutes, right? It's like crazy increase from what we saw, a few years ago, right? Unfortunately, most of the vehicles on the road that aren't Tesla are, like 150, max out at 150. But as more and more of them go up to that, 250, 300 max charging capability, when it's, married up with those 350 kW chargers, instead of, having 2 sessions per hour, right? Or 1.5 at a stall, right? You might be able to get 3 or 4, right? So the opportunity as the fleet of BEVs has higher power capabilities, faster charging curves, and the chargers get faster, right? The amount of power energy that can be dispensed and number of sessions, are going to probably, go up by 1.5 to 2x, right? So the economics will change, right? And then part of that gets into station charging policy, right? Like most everybody knows that Electrify America started testing, I guess it's been about a year now, where they would limit to 80%, right, in sort of the busier stations, right? So you can turn like cars more quickly, right? Really high idle fees. So I think when you add all that up, we're going to see more and more that the session count, which is a different way of thinking about utilization. But yeah, if you can go from like turning 2 cars to turning 3 or 4, right? Think about what that does to the economics, but also the energy required to do that, right?
Yes. So this is the last call on, this is the last question I have on the list from the audience. So audience folks, consider this your last call. Please, if you have any questions, now's the time to get them in. So that's my warning. But the question is both, I think, relevant to L2 and DCFC. So Rachel, if you're game to take this one first, it's a question about sort of site type and I guess site quality. Where do you see sort of utilization, if it's the appropriate metric, being different by the kind of site something is located in? So, for example, a gas station, a mall, public parking lot, et cetera. So, what do you think is a sort of an important metric for success for a site, right? Utilization or something else? And then B, where do you think those, where are some site types where that's sort of potentially, where it's sort of stand out or differs?
Yeah, so I do think that utilization is a metric that we need to continue to use. It's one that's going to be really important for the return on investment for these stations. I do think the ChargeX Consortium, which was a national lab consortium in partnership with over 80 partners in industry, have really been trying to run to ground what a quality customer experience is, and helping to problem solve any issues that are for kind of the whole industry that many of the private sector partners are experiencing, but maybe don't have the resources individually to solve. So I think under metrics, utilization is an important one, but I think increasingly important is the customer experience, and we're still developing metrics on how to evaluate that. But in terms of high utilization, I think you would find certain types of charging locations. It's pretty intuitive. It's going to be the behind the fence charging is going to be kind of the higher utilization, the dedicated workplace charging, because it's something that you can rely on. I actually remember many times some of my colleagues at Department of Energy over the last couple of years, I think probably about 20 charging stations were put under the Forrestal building. And I remember feeling such success when people would come griping to me that all the stations were taken because that, people knew that they could rely on it. I used it regularly. It was a great tool to increase my range. And I think multi-unit dwellings, again, they're the folks that are using multi-unit dwelling charging typically don't have a lot of alternatives, and so they really need to rely on that. So that's kind of like the high utilization. Maybe some of the lower utilization, also pretty intuitive. It's going to be public parking garages, general destination charging, maybe curbside charging in kind of low EV areas. And that's in part because, other cars can park in the EV charging spots and block them for a while. You might not know that you have the EV charging available at these destinations. It might not be you might be going to the grocery store, for example, and it's just a quick stop. So you don't really need to top off with level 2 charging because you're not going to be there for very long. So I think overall, the kind of big success factors is that you have kind of a predictable user base of EV drivers, whether that's residents or employees or fleet vehicles. It could also be important to have long dwell times. Typically we think about 6 to 8 hours in terms of long dwell times. Regular usage patterns, workplace charging, return to base fleet, both fit into that category. And then just not having other options, like multi-unit dwellings might not have other options. So those are kind of the key factors and some sites that fit into high and low utilization.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And you were clearly the right person to field your colleagues' complaints. I don't know if everybody would have been taking them in a positive light like you did.
Mark,
Lauren, yes, yeah, Lauren, I was
just would I add some things to that, because obviously, with fast charging, the co-located or nearby site hosts are, for many people, myself included, the number one reason I choose to stop at a particular fast charging station, right? The electricity is the same, right? Assuming that everything works with my car and it's reliable, et cetera. It's what do I want to have to eat, right? And not everybody makes that decision that way, but a lot of people do. And interestingly, I'm going to probably get in trouble this and steal some thunder of some data we have coming out soon, but we actually did analysis on US fast charging stations with a quick service restaurant located within 100 feet, I think it is. And the top two, this is where I'm going to get in trouble sharing some stuff, but the top two were Subway and Starbucks, right, as far as the most number of them. But here's the interesting thing. One of those two had like almost twice as many average charging sessions per day per location, right? And I can see you're calculating, trying to guess which one it was. So I'm not going to share which one it was, but the point of it is that, and there's obviously other factors involved in that, but people are going to choose which fast charging station based on, if it's at their favorite convenience store co-located, is it their favorite fast food restaurant? Do you like In-N-Out Burger versus McDonald's? Or do you love Taco Bell versus Chipotle? Like whatever it is, right? Like a lot of people are going to make that decision. And so for CPOs, like I think it's really important to understand like where you co-locate, right? Because that restaurant or quick service restaurant or whatever it is nearby could mean a significant difference in the number of sessions that you get, just because people prefer, think about the demographics of EV drivers and stuff. They may prefer certain types of coffee or whatever it is over other brands and that type of thing.
Lauren, we appreciate you breaking news, but
Yeah.
clearly that was just a teaser. We have to wait for
Yes.
the full report. To put a fine point on that, on the comment you're making there, it sounds like being adjacent to sort of fast casual restaurants
Yeah.
and/or coffee is pretty valuable. Are there other site types that also sort of bump up in terms of greater utilization?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think I'm out here on the West Coast, and so we're not as in love with convenience store chains as a lot of people are in the Mid-Atlantic and stuff. Like, I know people love their Sheets and their Wawas and things like that, right? I've never been to one, but so I think a lot of it is regionality, right? Like I literally know people like love I'm going to make it up and probably get it wrong, but they love the fried chicken sandwich at Sheets, like whatever it is, right? Like there are certain regionalization where, that regional chain might have its like loyal following that people are going to prefer over, I won't name a name, but over a national brand, quick service restaurant or whatever it is, right? Just because they love and are comfortable with, and maybe it's a treat. They get the soft serve frosty after their chicken sandwich or whatever it is, right? So I think there's a significant regionalization to it as well.
Okay, so destination, it sounds like food is food is
Yeah, I mean
potentially.
coffee. I mean coffee. There was a survey. I can't remember who did it recently, but basically the number one preference of EV drivers was coffee, right? And I know in my own case that's true as well, right? So I think coffee and food options is key. But what are the best food options might vary by location and region.
Okay.
Can I offer, just add a little bit too, that we really don't want to underestimate the basic necessities as well. And those might be a little bit harder to track, but like trash cans,
Right.
right? Like having trash cans at stations, having an awning, having lighting, like those are all very important things that don't always show up in the EV charging apps of, how convenient it is, right? So I do think that while it's important to understand the high performers, we also need to be making sure the low performers are meeting a basic minimum.
Yeah, and Rachel and Ari, on that point, I mean, one of the things that doesn't get enough play is around safety and lighting and things like that. And so we have this concept that you can go to a charging station at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and maybe it's not in the best area or whatever it is, but it's completely safe during the day. There's a lot of people around. There's a lot of open restaurants, quick service restaurants, whatever it is. There's people around, and it's safe. But you might come back to that location at 11:30 at night, and all the restaurants are closed, right? There's not many people around. The lights in the parking lot are like dimmed or turned down, right? So that same location on the different time of the day and night might go from being completely safe to not safe, right? And so that's really important consideration as well, and why a lot of the convenience store chains and the lounges and things like that are open 24 hours, or there's a passcode to get in. I think while they're very expensive, right, is going to be something that draws a lot of people when they have a choice.
That makes sense. I missed my calling clearly, by the way, as a bartender, because we got a surge of questions, surge of reaction to the last call.
The
So,
last call.
last call. So we've got a lightning round, trying to deal with 2 to 3 questions here. Hopefully we can get there. Lightning round question number one, is from Zach. If charging power is going up, is it reasonable to expect that flexible connections from utilities are going to become essential to be able to get to those power levels?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and not only that, but supply chain issues, right? Having those transformers and switchgear and stuff ready to go, and yeah, being able to connect up sort of really quickly. But again, I think that's where sort of we're going to start to see the battery storage start to play a huge role, because there's case studies out there where companies that are deploying integrated battery storage can deploy a station in weeks versus sort of months, and dealing with the utility, right? Because they in essence lower the sort of the connection need and power requirements.
Okay, so it's a useful tool both because power levels have gone up, but also because we have a constrained supply chain for
Yeah.
electric infrastructure.
Yep.
Question from Adam, which is, how did you get this utilization data? He is just interested in understanding how, what those sources are for that kind of data.
Yeah,
You can say secret sauce.
yeah, it's our secret sauce, but we have a number of sources. Nevi is one, direct from some of the CPOs and stuff, and then through some public access vehicles. And so I'll leave it at that because it is our secret sauce. Yeah.
Okay. Rachel, is it your secret sauce?
We do have EV Hub through Atlas Public Policy, where we do offer some of that, but also a little bit of secret sauce. Although there are more and more publicly available data sources on this. That was as a former public servant, that was an important piece of building out the EV charging network, is trying to share as much as possible, at least at an anonymized level, such that we can make better data-driven decisions in the future.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. We are out of time, so I would like Zach, my colleague, to just sort of so first of all, big round of appreciation and applause. Lauren and Rachel, this was just very informative. So really appreciate you taking all this time this afternoon and all the time to prep. It was certainly, valuable for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and
Thank
apologies
you.
for the barking dog on occasion. So
Didn't even notice the barking dog.
yeah, okay.
That was how interesting your conversation was. Zach, would you mind just bringing us home with our wrap up, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Ari. So our last slide, just a flag for, and again, thanks to our speakers today, Laura and Rachel, super informative, and appreciate those that submitted comments or questions. That was a very good discussion. So just a reminder, for later this week, we're holding a second series in the technical conference focused on communication standards directly. That'll run from 1 p.m. Eastern Time until 3 p.m. And just a highlight for those interested in attending, we are seeking public comment at the end of that meeting. So for those interested in communication standards, we did hear a lot today about how communication standards can play a role in helping EV drivers be able to charge and the features they enjoy while charging. So for those with interest in informing and helping us as we pursue the program review for the Make Ready program and consider the implications of what we heard today and what we'll hear on Thursday, we would love to hear public comments. So please plan to attend that, and thanks again for everyone for attending.